Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Obeka Brute Chronologist. This deck comes to us from Gus, who says only more optimal jank, no budget, and no other comments. Alright, let's take a look at the deck and see what we can improve. As always, the deck list is in the video description below. In this deck assist video, I think I'm going to be going over general basics that the deck could, improve on, and not so much the things that Obeka is particularly uniquely good at. So if you've played Obeka, if you love Obeka, and I definitely love Obeka, and you have some suggestions, I'd love if you put them in the comments below. And while you're in the video description, be sure to notice the link where you can submit your own deck so that I can take a look and help you make it better. And if you'd like your deck to be next on the list, there is a link for that too. So who is Obeka and why are we using her as our commander? Well, Obeka Brute Chronologist is a 4-mana 3/4 ogre wizard in Grixis colors. That's blue, black, red. She has one ability and one ability only. You tap her and it says, the player whose turn it is may end this turn. Now, this is a bit of a tricky ability, so you got to kind of know what ending a turn does. What it does is, thankfully with all the reminder text, is it exiles all spells and abilities from the stack. The player whose turn it is discards down to maximum hand size, damage wears off, and this turn and until end of turn effects end. So when do you use Obeka? Well, for people who might be new, they might think that if your turn isn't going the way you like, you can use Obeka and basically end it immediately. Or if someone tries to remove Obeka and it's your turn, you can tap her and end the turn immediately. These are true. You can also use her politically for the same effects on your opponent's turns, asking if the opponent will want to end the turn. If they say yes and it benefits you, you may use Obeka to do so. Make sure you play in a group where people are keeping their word and not lying, of course. But that's not the real reason we use Obeka. See, it says here that end of turn effects end, and that's only half true. You see, an end of turn effect actually has its own trigger, where the turn goes to end of turn and all of the end of turn effects trigger. While those end of turn triggers are on the stack, you can use Obeka and delete those end of turn triggers from the game. What does that mean? Well, that means if you have a creature, let's say like Puppeteer Click, that says you reanimate a creature from your opponent's graveyard and you keep it until the beginning of your next end step, and then you exile it. Well, after you reanimate that creature, it comes to your next end step, the trigger goes on the stack, and then Obeka can be tapped and remove that trigger. With that, you get to keep that creature. Now, there's a few different kind of end step triggers, and I'm not always sure which one there is. I think there's some that trigger every end step, and you need to be careful of those, and you can't really keep them forever. But my understanding is when it says your next end step, it means from that ability triggering. So once that next end step or that end of turn happens, it's just gone forever. Regardless, that's the main goal of Obeka. Obeka lets you break, literally shatter, cards that have abilities that are dependent on them only lasting a short amount of time. For example, and I'll bring this up later, Act of Treason is a card that steals your opponent's creature for the turn for only 3 mana. This entire ability is predicated by the fact that you only get it for the turn. Otherwise, that'd be an incredibly powerful magic card. Well, Obeka gets around that. And when she gets around that, you've just played a very, very strong card. The one thing about Obeka that's important to remember is that Obeka tends to be very, very reliant on the commander, as there are very, very few effects in the game that have that ability. And I'm going to find the other two Oh, that's a mistake. It's going to get me all the end of turn things. How do I find this? I believe it is an artifact is the main one, which I don't think we're actually playing in here. Oh, Sundial of the Infinite, we are. But there is another one that is a blue spell, 6 mana, instant. Just want to have this also open because I don't think we're playing that either. No, we're not. It's Time Stop. So Time Stop, Sundial of the Infinite, and I think there's one more. Discontinuity are the three ones, I believe. I should just double check before I Time Stop Masterful. Yeah, yeah, okay. So all these spells just end the turn. Now, the Sundial is best because it's the lowest mana, and just like Obeka only works on your own turn. But Time Stop and Discontinuity, Time Stop works on anyone's turn, which is so strong to end your opponent's turn, but not as good in Commander, but sometimes very good in Commander. This one's kind of open, but it is a very strong card. And Discontinuity is basically Time Stop, but it costs 2 mana on your own turn, which makes it also very good. Also, very grim art for a blue card. This is something I would expect in black and not blue. All right, so we get the main idea of what the deck is. Now, let's take a look at this deck itself. And the first thing and the main thing I'm going to kind of focus on is our curve. Unfortunately for this deck, the curve is kind of rough. There is a lot of high mana cards. If we start at 8 mana, we've got the 1, then we've got 4 total, then we've got 11 total, and then we have, I think that's 19. Almost a fifth of the deck is 5 mana or higher. That is really high. And then secondly, we have what I see as 14 4 mana cards. As you've noticed in my videos, I'm very picky about cards that tend to be the same mana cost as our commander. And so, a big part of this deck assist will be looking into this deck and seeing what cuts and being a little critical of some of the cards that we have. And then a lot of my additions will be just generically good cards that can keep a deck going together. Oh yes, I said I would do this, and I forgot to do it. Here is another way of looking at the deck. This is our visual spoiler. It's still sorted by mana value. And we can see in our creatures we have a 1 2 mana creature, two 3 mana creatures, and then from that point on, all of our creatures are 4 mana and up. Our instants and sorceries are a little better, but a lot of 2s that go up to 4, and our artifacts are a lot of 2s and that go up. And our enchantments are all 4 mana and higher. So we've got quite a bit of a collection. So let's start by looking at our high mana cards and moving backwards and seeing what we can cut. So Sphinx of the Second Sun is a 8 mana Sphinx that gives you an extra beginning phase after your I'm sorry, I need to read this. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you get an additional beginning phase after this phase. So basically, halfway through your turn, you get to start your turn again, which means you get to untap, upkeep, and draw again. This card has almost nothing to do with Obeka. It is an interesting time-related card. I do find that to be really neat, but otherwise, it doesn't really do much for us. In fact, if something happens early in the game, early in the turn, let's say on your combat step, your opponents do something that will really ruin your turn, forcing to use Obeka. Well, when you use Obeka, you then don't get any of the Sphinx of the Second Sun's abilities. So therefore, there's a very high chance of this card just not doing anything. And therefore, I really don't like it. Now, I will say for our higher mana cards, you can see up here we have, well, this is a lot of scrolling. We have a few cards like Jaxus the Troublemaker, and we have in our enchantments. Let's see, Sneak Attack, which allows us to cheat these creatures into play. I think Ilharg is in here too. This is a tough way for me to get through the through the deck. I won't lie. Ilharg. So we have ways to cheat these cards into play, and we have a few reanimation spells as well. However, even Sphinx of the Second Sun does not feel particularly worth reanimating for the cost it's going to, like the work that's required. This isn't like a giant Eldrazi. This isn't a card that enters the battlefield and just ruins everyone's day. This isn't a Praetor that gives like a mirrored effect, putting your opponents very far behind. This is just a very specific Sphinx that works on your turn. So I don't like this. I'd like to cut it. Likewise, Drakuseth, Lord Xander, and Sepulchre Primordial all have very little to do with Obeka. Now, granted, they are better creatures than the Sphinx, but they're better creatures in not the same way. Drakuseth is a dragon whose main benefit goes into haste and dragon decks, where it can come out, immediately attack, and get its ability burning down creatures on your opponent's side. Lord Xander belongs in a reanimation and sacrifice deck, where you can use his ability to basically force an opponent to sacrifice half their board or discard half their hand on ETB. Very, very good, but a different kind of deck. And then the Sepulchral Primordial is a reanimation machine for your opponent's graveyards. So you benefit once again with a deck that can pressure your opponents, pressure their hands and graveyards, and then reanimate their best cards. These three cards have almost nothing to do with each other, and they are our 3/7 mana cards. I think, depending on what you would like, they can be really easily replaced with a number of different cards. Either a bunch of the cards I'm going to suggest that are lower in mana and will just keep your deck together, or later they can be replaced by cards that are just really good with Obeka, that use really interesting until end of turn effects. Looking at 6 mana, and we're going to go a little faster on these ones. Runaclad gives your tokens haste and makes copies of any token. You're not a token deck. I don't quite understand why this is here. Combustible Gearhulk is another really good enter the battlefield effect. And here, I think this is kind of fine. Because of your sneak attacks and your reanimation, Combustible Gearhulk does have a pretty good enter the battlefield ability, so I'm not too upset about this. Etali Primal Storm also is a pretty good card. Now, this also seems to work with the sneak attack kind of deck style, and with that, I do really like this. Grave Titan as well works with a sneak attack because you get 2 triggers, enter the battlefield and attack. And though I'm usually kind of medium on Grave Titan, when you get 2 triggers instantly, I do like Grave Titan a lot more. Having 10 power out on the board, but also additionally the 4 tokens is really, really good, and I'm a big fan of that, so I think this is very good here. Hellkite Courser is... I like this. This has been the first card, I think, since the high mana cost that works with Obeka. Not just literally because it brings your commander into play, but also because you can use Obeka to get rid of the ability and keep her around. This makes sense. Or you can play the Hellkite Courser and then, play and get a free activation of Obeka, which I guess you do on the end step anyway, so either way she stays on the battlefield. That's really good. I think this inclusion makes a lot of sense. Massacre Worm, once again, kind of weird. Feels like a big 6 mana black card. Doesn't have an attack effect, so I don't like it as much on sneak attack. But it is a semi-board wipe. It's like a smaller one-shot Elsh Norn, and that's not too bad. So, though I don't really like it, I think it's not as bad as, Runaclad, for sure. And Cedrus, the Traitor King, is the card that makes the most sense here, because once again, it works with, outside of Hellkite Courser, it is the other card that works with Obeka, where you can unearth your creatures and then use Obeka to cancel the exile effect. So with that in mind, the thing is, Cedrus is otherwise just really kind of bad, is the problem. You need to cheat Cedrus into play, and then you need to be able to use his Unearth a few times immediately before he's worth it. What I would suggest is Cedrus could work really well in a more reanimation themed version of this deck. And I think I'll say that a little more near the end. But this deck is going into like it's kind of dipping its toe into a few kind of strategies, and I'd like it to commit just a little more to those strategies so that you can get the most out of them as opposed to having just a little bit here and there. Going really quickly to 5 mana, we can see some more cards that make sense, but some that don't make sense for sure. Consuming Aberration is a really strange inclusion here. I get that it mills your opponents out as you play, but this works like if you want to do this fairly, this works in a storm deck. And also, why are you benefiting? Like, I get that it's a very good sneak attack creature if you have a bunch of cards in your opponent's graveyards, but if you don't, it's a very small creature. It also doesn't have evasion, so it just loses to blocking, but this belongs like if you're playing it for its ability, you want to be able to trigger it yourself a bunch of times by using a lot of spells. This deck isn't really good at that. So it's just a big beater that doesn't really work on theme. So once again, consuming aberration doesn't really feel like it makes sense. Ilharg, Kiki-Jiki both make a lot of sense. I like them both here. They're very, very good. Mishra Eminent One is profoundly confusing in this deck. You have 12 artifacts. Why are you making them into 4/4s? Like none of your artifacts benefit from being a creature, and yeah, you get to keep it permanently, but like why though? Like why does your Soul Ring being a 4/4 is beneficial to you? 5 mana is way too much for this ability. I don't understand why Mishra's here, and I would recommend taking it out. Puppeteer Click, real good, just a fantastic card. Honestly, whenever I can fit Puppeteer Click into decks, I'm really, really happy. Definitely works with Consuming Aberration, Sepulchre Primordial, this kind of reanimate your opponent's creatures effect. But Puppeteer Click is just so good by itself. It doesn't really need a lot of support because almost universally you will find, a creature to bring back that you're happy with. So really, really like it. Definitely should stay in here. Perforos, right, this is the one with the sneak attack. Yep, makes perfect sense. I really like the sneak attack theme, and I'm very happy to see Perforos in here. Zara says whenever she attacks, look at the defending player's hand. You may put a creature tapped and attacking. Okay, this is neat. I wish she had haste, but I guess the sneak attack portion of the deck works really well for this, so I'm going to say definitely another better inclusion. All right, let's clean up with the 4 mana stuff really, really quickly, because that's the main thing I want to talk about. We have a lot of 4 mana cards, and we need to cull some of these cards so that we can have room for other stuff. All right, so obviously Obeka stays in. Avarice Dragon draws you an extra card per turn, but discards your hand at the end of turn. Depending on your build, if you lean more into reanimation, I don't mind this. But if you're playing more of a sneak attack deck, I dislike this. Why is that? Well, reanimation wants your cards to the graveyard, so if you do occasionally discard your hand, you're not too upset. Otherwise, if you're playing sneak attack where you want to keep your creatures in play, this is pretty bad because if Obeka gets pressured and you have to either use her too early or she's removed from the field, all of a sudden Avaricious Dragon becomes incredibly dangerous to your game plan because you're losing all of those creatures that are in your hand that you wanted to sneak out. So not great if you're going for that plan. Just be picky, and whichever one you decide, it'll be fine, but you do have to decide. Identity Thief, is interesting. It just doesn't feel like it's as strong as everything else. It's a cool effect. It does steal, like, it steals creatures, and if you use Obeka, it does permanently steal creatures, and I do really like that. But at the 4 drop, and with everything else going on, it just feels a little weak. It is a good, sneaking. I will say something I should mention. Maybe I need to read this a little better. Let me see. Where is our Ilharg? So remember when Ilharg puts creatures into play, tapped and attacking, you don't get these triggers, right? And that's a little tricky. So you cheat in Identity Thief, and it's just a 0/3 that's attacking. And you don't really want that. And I believe that sneak attack just puts it in and gives it haste. So sneak attack works, but Ilharg doesn't. So just be careful with things like that. I don't, and just to go back to it, Identity Thief, I don't think is particularly good here, so I would cut it out. Jaxus is very, very strong here. Obviously, a sneak attack creature is really, really good, so absolutely keep it. And Theon does the same thing kind of as Kiki. So once again, very, very good. Very happy to have it here. Hate Mirage is really, really interesting. I am inclined to ask you to keep it. I think the fact that it makes copies of 2 creatures is good, but one of the problems is that you have to cast this on your turn. Otherwise, you cannot guarantee Obeka's ability working. So they, oh, it is a sorcery anyways. Oh, never mind. Yeah, I was thinking of a different version, a different card. Yeah, this is great. This is fantastic. Absolutely keep this. Of all the cards that just, benefit with Obeka, this has a very, very high ceiling, and the floor is still pretty good because you're getting 2 cards for this. And worst case scenario, even if Obeka doesn't do anything, sometimes this card will just win you games as you copy someone's Eldrazi or Blightsteel Colossus or what have you and swing and, you know, get really far with that. Voidwalk. Don't play this card. I get that. Okay, I see why. Because it exiles it until the end step, and then you cancel that end step, and then with Cypher, you get to do that every attack. Yeah, don't play this card. This is a lot of work. This is 4 mana for a really bad ability, a Cypher ability that isn't particularly good in your deck because you don't always have creatures to attack with, and you don't want to Cypher this onto Obeka. Yeah, this is not good, unfortunately. The ceiling looks really, really high, but the floor is really, really low, and I don't think it's particularly good. Macabre Mockery. I'm pretty sure you can get this ability at like maybe 2 or 3 mana. 4 mana seems too much for this. Once again, because Obeka's at 4 mana, we don't want too many 4 mana cards. So let's toss this out. Relic of Sauron. This is a mana rock, so I'm kind of okay being it at 4 mana, but even then, I guess its second ability is really good too, especially going to reanimate. I think I'd be okay with this. This is a really interesting card. I always think you have to permanently kind of, excuse me about my phone, you have to sacrifice it to get the other ability, but you don't. And that's pretty good. So Relic of Sauron seems fine. With Erebos, I think I would rather just a 2 mana or 3 mana reanimation spell over this. Once again, not only is this at 4 mana to cast, which conflicts with their commander, it's actually also 4 mana to activate, so that's 2 conflicts. And though it's really good with our commander out because you get to reanimate things and keep them, it's still just okay. And in a lot of situations, I think you'd be happier with like Animate Dead or any other just generic reanimation spell. All right, last 4. Flame Shadow Conjuring is for 1 extra red every time you play a card, you get a copy of it with haste. This is really good. I do think this is fine because even if you don't have Obeka out, once you have this out and you drop like Grave Titan, a 7 mana Grave Titan to make, what is this, like 6/2/2s and attack with a 6/6, I think that's really, really good. So I do like this card. Psychic Vortex feels really cool. I mean, like, it's just, it feels really, really dangerous, right? I guess the thing that kind of gets me is that it gets harder and harder to say no to this. Because let's say Obeka's off the field and you don't get to skip that effect. And there's like three counters on this, right? The only way to sacrifice this card is to not pay the upkeep. And the upkeep is drawing four cards. How are you going to say no to that, right? By letting it go to the graveyard that way, you are going so far behind in cards that you could be in the exchange of, you know, losing a discard your whole hand or sacrificing a land. So with that in mind, I think this card is tricky to play. Once again, I like it more in a reanimation deck than I like it in a sneak attack deck, but I'll leave it to you to decide because I think this could be a really good card. It just worries me a little bit. Sneak attack, obviously, very, very strong. And the Bath Song just feels incredibly weird. I don't understand why this is in this deck. I get that it's a funny card, and I do like funny cards, but it just doesn't seem to be on theme. So I would cut those. Now, there's a few other cards here and there that I would also cut, but I think the majority of the rest of the deck is particularly good. So with that in mind, I want to go into some additions, and you'll have to excuse me because a lot of them are kind of maybe straightforward or boring, but I think the deck would really, really benefit from it. First of all, as I say oftentimes, let's get some card draw. You are in black, and in black we have a lot of very straightforward card draw that doesn't require, a lot of money or a lot of mana or a lot of things to work out. It's kind of funny that black is the main color of draw I find in Commander, outside of green, which I would say is the second color, and blue, the color we associate with card draw, like only has it either as Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, and after that a bunch of niche cards that belong in decks here or there. So here we have Night's Whisper, you draw two, lose two, nice and easy. Read the Bones, scry two, draw two, lose two, also very good. And then Phyrexian Arena, which lets you draw a card and lose a life per turn, and Underworld Connections that works very, very similarly on enchanting a land. Now, Greed would usually be on this list, but once again, 4 mana is a bit tricky for us, so I'm not going to put it there. Next, also in black, I would like to add a few Feign Death effects. Obeka is really, really strong, and I think she's going to be targeted a lot. So having a few more 1 mana cards to kind of protect her would be really nice. Feign Death and Undying Malice immediately reanimate her, and Undying Evil reanimates her if she doesn't have a +1/+1 counter. If we go into instance, we can see you're already playing Malakir Rebirth, so it just makes sense to play maybe one or two of these other ones. I would definitely consider Feign Death and Undying Malice. After that, I probably wouldn't play Undying Evil. Likewise, I think you could also get away with playing Slip Out the Back, which can phase out Obeka and protect her. But do note, this will stop her from being able to tap if she's untapped, because she'll be phased out for the turn cycle. But this will also protect her from board clears, which I think is very relevant. Likewise, another option for direct is Mizium's Skin, 1 blue to give her hexproof, and then for 2 blue, you can give hexproof to your entire team. There's a bunch of 1 blue hexproof cards. I said Mizium's Skin because sometimes you might want to protect multiple of your creatures, but any 1 blue hexproof card will probably do the job. All right, then I have a few more suggestions for 1 mana cards because I feel like, especially in instance, you have a lot of 2 mana cards. I'd like to add a few 1 mana cards. What is this card? I guess this is the problem with seeing the pictures. Thrill Possibility. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Before we get into that, I just want to mention we could probably play the Signets. Your Signets would be Izzet, Dimmer, and Rakdos. You're already playing all 3 talismans, and I do really, really like that. Like, your mana rocks aren't bad, and I do really appreciate that. You got Soul Ring, Arcane, Talisman, 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 and Relic. And I do like that, but if you wanted to, you could play some, if not all of these. Now, you don't have enough card draw that I think you should play all of them, But it is important to note that a lot of your stronger cards are higher mana cards, so this ramp is pretty relevant to your deck. I'll let you decide in the end how many you want to play, but I think they're kind of free for you to play. All right, back to 1 mana cards. Lightning Bolt. I think you'd be happy to play Lightning Bolt in a deck like this. Just a little bit of really cheap removal goes a long way, and you'd be happy to be able to get rid of targets that are hard for this deck to kind of deal with. Likewise, we have Pongify and Rapid Hybridizations. Both of these cards do the same thing. 1 mana, destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated, and then you give them a 3/3. This is if I'm in blue and I'm looking for 1 mana removal, these are the two cards I go for. Yes, a 3/3 is kind of scary, but you have a 3/4 as your commander, so worst case scenario, you can easily block. Also, you have tons of very, very large creatures, and I think they are worth holding on to block these things, I should say. Regardless, I think these are really nice additions to your removal suite. You're not in white, so you don't have the best removal, but this is pretty close. All right, I have a few last things to say. One, in terms of sneak attack style things, Generator Servant seems interesting in a deck like this, where you can play it almost like a temporary mana rock. You sacrifice it, and then you get to summon a creature, and if you've used the mana, right, it gains haste. And I think that's really good for a number of creatures. You can play this on turn 3 and then haste out like a Grave Titan or a Tali on turn 4. And I think that's really, really good to get you very far ahead. With this, you can keep more of your higher mana cards, and you have even more of a kind of like out of nowhere ability to, you know, go from a mediocre board to a really, really big board, something that sneak attack itself presents for you, and this does it in a way that you get to keep the creature and you don't need Obeka. So I think this is definitely a card worth considering. Finally, the last thing I want to say is these claim the firstborn effects. I mentioned earlier that these cards, claim the firstborn, wrangle, and active treason effects, are particularly good with Obeka because you steal a creature and you get to keep it forever. I'm not going to tell you to play a lot of them, but I think you could play one or two, maybe even just the one, depending on who you're with. Active treason is really good for really big creatures. Wrangle is good for medium-sized creatures and commanders, and Claim the Firstborn is really really good when your play group is really low to the ground. So up to you to decide which one of those you want to run, and I think you'll be pretty happy to run it. All right, that's mainly I think going to be the things I have to say. Once again, just to end the thought, I think this deck is trying to figure out its direction. I think right now it's leaning towards you know, a sneak attack kind of style. And though there are reanimation cards here and there, Ayara on the back, Feldon, reanimate, things like that, I think a lot more of the deck leans towards this kind of sneak attack style. And I think you'll get a lot more leverage if you go in that direction. So that's what I would suggest. Kind of try to go into that direction. You'll still have the ramp so you can power out those creatures. You'll still have Obeka that you can cheat out, make those sneak attacks even better. But look for creatures with really good ETBs, really good attack triggers. Look on EDH Rec for some sneak attack ideas, and go from there and see what you can do with the deck. I think it would be a very, very strong direction and a very successful direction for Obeka. I hope this deck assist video was helpful to you. If you'd like to send me another draft of your deck, or any draft of any deck, there is a link in the video description below. And as always, if you would like to comment, subscribe, I would be incredibly grateful. The channel is growing, and any help is important. I love Obeka. I think she's an absolutely phenomenal commander, and I'm really excited to see what you do with this deck moving forward. All right, good luck.